Hello. How is everybody? Good. I ate a lot of really yummy chicken with gravy on it, so I feel really great. Um, I want to thank you all again for good conversations the past couple weeks, especially last week. I really love hearing from you all, and I know that you like hearing from each other. So discussion around the room has been really good, and we've talked about some hard stuff, so you guys should be proud of the things that you're sharing and the conversations that you're having around your table. And I'm going to ask you to do it again tonight. So this session is entitled The Gospel According to New Orleans. Can anyone guess what we might be talking about? We're talking about Hurricane Katrina and kind of the poverty that was uncovered by what we saw in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. So we'll do the same setup as we have been doing. We'll watch a video, we'll have big room discussion, and then you'll have the opportunity to do some Bible study at your table, reading Nehemiah. I have passed around papers for you to take notes on during the video so that you have something ready to share with the room when I ask you. And if there are no questions, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, great. Thank you. Key issue, I always forget. The key issue is the hidden secret of poverty in the United States was exposed by Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. I was really young when Hurricane Katrina came through, so I remember being a child viewing the aftermath and not really understanding the depth of it until I got older. So this was interesting for me to learn about. But let me read this welcome and then we'll jump into the video. It says, "Restoring the hope of America's poorest families, renewing our national infrastructures, protecting our environmental stability, and rethinking our most basic priorities will require nothing less than a national change of heart and direction. It calls for a transformation of political ethics and governance and a move from serving private investors to ensuring the public good. If Katrina changes our political conscience and reinvigorates among us a commitment to the common good, then even this terrible tragedy might be redeemed." Okay, before we get to the first question, what stood out to you from the video? What are some notes that you took? What did you take away from what Jim Wallace had to say? Sure.
I was struck by the example of the canary in the mines.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I grew up knowing why canaries got put down in mines, but making that next step and saying the poor are our canaries, and we need to be mindful of the conditions of poor people because ultimately it impacts and predicts what's going to happen in our society. Wow, pretty scary.
Jim?
One thing I kind of missed in his observations about New Orleans and Katrina was the fact that a lot of these poor people on the roofs and flooded out of all they possessed, they were church people. Their churches were also ruined and destroyed. And that's what the volunteers at CBF sent and the coordination that we did discovered that they knew scriptures as much as we did. They believed in church. They grew up in the church. And so they were just desperate.
Yep. Thank you, Jim. That leads us very well into our first question, unless there was any other thoughts that anyone wanted to share about the video. Okay. Yeah, so on the same note that Jim was talking about, what did you first feel when you saw the devastation of Hurricane Katrina and then Hurricane Rita that came right after? Do you know anyone who was living in the areas affected by the hurricanes, and did you participate in any of the mobilizations to send aid? We'll do some brief stories because I'm sure y'all have a lot to share about this.
I have some friends from the 70s from Bible seminary that were from New Orleans, and they came to California for Bible seminary. And they were in New Orleans when Katrina happened. They had started a church there in the early 80s, and it was a fairly integrated church, white and black, but mostly white. And they were able to evacuate and had places to go, the vast majority of them. They were fortunate that way. When they came back, which took a while before they were allowed to come back even, the church had been damaged, and that was going to take a while to be repaired. But what really struck them and stayed with me, just from being in touch with them, was the families and the houses and the people in their neighborhood, and not just where their congregation lived, but other people there. That had to be done first. And they met in the church area once you could do that, and outside to have church services with, and it was often people from the neighborhood, not people from their congregation. And it was really transforming as a church, as pastors. They're still there in New Orleans. They've gone through a lot of different things, and the church just really took off after that, after they recovered, and they developed a community ministry that they had never considered before for women who needed rehabilitation, and it's totally faith-based. And looking back, it's just an amazing picture of how God works through and in those circumstances for good. But it was super hard. It was really, really hard on everybody, more than I had at that point in my life understood was even, something that you could get through. And honestly, the government wasn't much help. It was the people. It was the people in the church and in the neighborhoods coming together.
Yeah. Thank you, Biana. I think Gail had one.
I experienced Katrina during my Methodist years. So because of that, the church that we attended, because they had a fairly large piece of property up in Chamblee, was turned into a station where people who were fleeing New Orleans and were coming to Atlanta could come and pick up clothing and household items, whatever. I mean, we had a huge drive that spread outside the church into the whole community to try to get things there in our activities building and to be able to give it out. And then, of course, United Methodist have, and CBF has something too for disaster relief. United Methodist is called UMCOR, and I forget what it stands for. But anyway, they will take donations and put together teams to send into New Orleans or wherever the disaster is. And I was just flabbergasted by the number of people who were leaving. And then you turn on the TV and you see the images of people on their roof and realize there are thousands who could not get out, who lost everything. And that, I think that's the first time I came face to face with that level of poverty and realizing how drastic it is to live on the edge and what that looks like. And yeah, it was horrifying.
Right after Katrina, Noel met a pastor in Marietta that he had said that they had sent several buses to help evacuate people. And this was a primarily black congregation, and a lot of them had relatives in New Orleans. Well, Noel got to talking to him, and you know, the Cavett room. Mrs. Cavett lived on our street, and she had passed away. They were about to get dumpsters to put all of the furniture and things in, and Noel talked to the administrator of her estate, and he said, these people need things for the people that are coming. They came and cleaned out the entire house, and they used that. So I think that was a blessing, but
Yeah.
it made you stop and think how fortunate we are, and just what the difference is when some tragedy like that hits.
Yeah. So I was 9 years old when Katrina happened, and it has not been until recently, because the 20-year anniversary of Katrina was in August. So this has been popping up a lot, and the documentary came around on Netflix again. I remember watching news coverage, and like Gail had said, I had never seen images of flooding that looked like that before. I don't know if any of us had, because we had never had coverage of natural disasters in such a way. And I remember being a kid, uneducated, and my parents sitting around watching TV and looking at those people on their roofs and thinking they are so dumb for not evacuating. Did they not hear? Like, did no one tell them? Why didn't they just leave? And I think a lot of people had that reaction, and my parents had that reaction because they didn't know that those people couldn't leave. And so that is the reality, the uncovering of poverty that Jim Wallace is talking about, is those people could not leave. And the nation watched them sitting on their roofs, waiting for help and judging them for not leaving. And it was a big educational moment for all of us. So that's what I take away from this. We can go ahead and jump to the next question. Okay, Jim Wallace says that the tragedy of Katrina can be redeemed if our nation would commit to breaking down the walls between the rich and the poor. What role did America's racial history play in who was most vulnerable when the hurricanes hit, and what redemptive progress have you seen in the years following Katrina?
Yeah, I'm afraid to say I think we're going in the wrong direction. That there is a concept that you sometimes encounter of the undeserving poor, you know, and there are a lot of people who are very judgmental, and this touches on what you were just saying, you know, Allie. It's like, what's wrong with these people? You know, why can't they pull themselves up by their bootstraps? And, you know, I'd like to think that we were breaking down these barriers and moving forward, but I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know people's thoughts about, you know, what we as a church can do to try to help rebalance that.
Yeah, we've talked about this bootstraps thing before, especially last year when we did our When Helping Hurts study, and we know that pulling up your bootstraps is not going to get you out of poverty or fix the system. Yeah. But yeah, if anyone has comments on that, we'd love to hear them. Gail?
This is a commercial you didn't know I was going to do, but you remember a few months ago we sponsored the Cost of Poverty event here. And some of you in this room, like me, went through that, and that was very eye-opening for me to go, and also very frustrating, extremely frustrating, because no matter what you did in your 15-minute period of time, you couldn't do everything that you needed to do to survive. And it wasn't created to be an impossible event. It was created to be an eye-opening event. I agree with what Phil said, that it feels very much like we're not going in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really need to get your eyes opened, the next time you hear about one of those cost of poverty events, you need to take the opportunity to participate in it.
Yeah.
Because it will help you get over your privilege and understand truly a little bit better of what it's like, and the fact that people who are poor cannot pull themselves out of poverty without some assistance. And by granny, that's what the Bible tells us in the first place. I mean, okay, I'm going to start preaching now, but the whole business about not reaping your fields all the way to the borders, leaving some of your harvest unharvested so that the poor have an opportunity. We don't do that anymore, and we need to do that. We need to be aware and realize that we've been blessed, and it's not all for us.
Yeah.
We're supposed to share it.
Yeah. Thank you, Gail. Anyone want to follow up, Gail, on that? All right, let's jump to the next question. Where do you live in proximity to those struggling economically in your community? How might physical distance from those living in poverty affect one's heart for the poor? Biana?
So compared to most of you, I'm fairly new in Atlanta. And I just recall when I was looking for a place to live when I was first here, and I stayed with family for a while, but then was looking for my own place. And I was looking at different neighborhoods, and there were a couple that were more affordable, what I was finding, because I was going to rent. And I'd run it by my daughter and her husband, and they, oh, no, you can't live in that neighborhood. That wouldn't be safe. So they said, look at this part, look at that part, look at these others. Well, a lot of the others were way too expensive to try and live within my budget. Eventually I found an area in Toco Hills area, Decatur, but it is predominantly people doing very well. There are some homeless people in the area. There are some programs, especially in rentals, where it's subsidized for veterans and those kind of things. But it is different. And I thought for a while about living in one of those other neighborhoods that were not as safe or as convenient, just from a ministry standpoint. But how do you do that when you're a single person, you know, and you're going into a new community? You go to where people are like you. You just do that. And so then that distance, we don't understand each other, you know. And even when we did the lessons here about Black Americans and what they're going through and those kind of things, trying to understand that more, some book studies, you know, a few years ago, we all had a lot of trouble, both the white people and the black people that were in the study, really understanding each other. We made progress because we were together more and talking about these things. But so much of the time we lived separately, even though we may know a few people of the different race. But when we look at it seriously, the ones I may know are mostly people who have done really well because they've gotten more education, they've had support of some kind. They're not the ones that are in poverty. It frustrates me because it is so difficult of a problem And I worked in public health for years with the poorest of the people in our county, and was very aware of how a lot of things, they were good things we were doing. There were some good results, but overall, the ones that, just in my experience, that was really a change that lasted in their situation, it was when there was a church involved also. And I have taken that with me since then, and it hasn't gotten any easier, though, to come up with how do we do that? How do we break down those walls, those barriers? Because that's what it's going to take.
Thanks, Biana. Following up on some of the things Biana said, I think there is this very deep running fear of people who live in poverty. It could come from a million different places that I'm not an expert on, but there is fear there. And the process of getting over that fear takes relationship. It takes an organized relationship, like through a church. It takes intentional time to learn about and care for people who look differently from you and have less than you and live in different circumstances than you, and recognizing that people are just people and they also are insecure and have wants and needs and laugh and cry and are the same people that we are. So that fear takes a long time to get over, but it has to start with relationship. And it has to start with opening your door and sitting down, sharing a meal, sharing stories. And a great place for that to happen is inside of your church. Anything else? Andy? Will you wait for a microphone? We want to all hear you.
Oh, it's a very complex subject, but one of the things I think people and things like this, it seems like you probably can't identify with the people.
Mm-hmm.
And until something happened to you, but I think people are a lot closer to poor people than they think.
Mm-hmm.
37% of American adults cannot come up with $400 if they lost their job. And 37% of people want New Orleans, and 37% of adults in America don't look like me. So there are probably people that live near you
Mm-hmm.
that are suffering,
Mm-hmm.
but you may not know it. And the only thing it takes is a couple of health issues with no insurance or unemployment, and a lot of people would be suffering like those people in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andy. Phil?
So, Allison and I spent a lot of our time in Black Mountain, North Carolina, and, the town was hit very hard by Helene last year, but particularly it was the neighboring town of Swannanoa, which is a much poorer town, that got hit. And, we, like a lot of people in Black Mountain and Asheville, we spent a fair amount of time in the weeks after the storm, helping out at food banks and, helping out Hispanic church community that we had driven by 1,000 times and, never thought to stop at. And it was really heartwarming to see, people from all communities, local government, NGOs, churches, non-governmental organizations like Samaritan's Purse, working with state, local, federal government, because eventually everybody showed up and everybody did their thing to try to help. But I can't honestly say, that a year later, where things have largely been rebuilt, although Swannanoa is still hurting, that a lot of those episodes of cooperation have evolved into real lasting connections and friendships. People helped each other out, and then they went back to their old lives. You know, and I'm as guilty of that as anyone. So I think that that's a lesson that I'm still trying to absorb.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have it?
Just one observation, and my wife can correct me if I overgeneralize. Living in Europe the 30 years, whenever a catastrophe would hit, like since we're talking about Katrina, the Europeans, they look to their government, and they have this social network that's extensive, and they pay their taxes so that people, when they're in trouble, are going to get help. When they get upset is when they see someone begging on the street in front of the bus stop, because they say, don't give any money to that person. They're getting that from the government. So that's when they would get upset. In this country, we look at the victim and say, it's the old bootstrap thing again. The fact that, I'm just going to get political here, that FEMA has come under attack, and the idea of reducing the ability of FEMA to help people in need is about as bad of an idea as I can imagine, because CPF, when they started, Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida and just devastated all that stuff. And the churches that were relating to us rallied. And I mean, a lot of churches were sending teams for mudding out houses and building new and all that kind of thing. And the thing I loved about the instructions that were given to volunteer teams going to help in Homestead and all was, they would say there are a lot of children that are running around in the neighborhood. Their schools are destroyed, their homes are destroyed. And so they'll come out and they'll hang out talking to the volunteers. And the thing I loved about the orientation was that they said, so when the children show up, play with them. And then do your work that you can, but play with the children, relate to them. And I just add that it has nothing to do with strategic stuff, but it absolutely enlightened my view of helping out.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Pat?
Studies have shown that most people, and when I'm not talking poor, rich, whatever, I'm talking about when someone's in a great need, people can stop their lives to help you. This is like friends or the church thing, for about 6 weeks. In other words, they can put their life on hold to give you all they've got for about 6 weeks, and that's about all. And just studies have shown that's, even though they want to, that's about as long as they can put themselves on hold.
It's an interesting statistic. Thank you, Pat. Anyone else? All right, let's see if I have another question. I can't remember. Okay. Who are the most vulnerable members of our society right now? How might the church reach out to them? What can the church do to help break down the walls between the rich and the poor? I'm looking for solutions here, everybody. Gail?
This is not so much a solution as an observation. I think many times when we do get moved to the point that we want to help, we sometimes come up with ideas that we think will help rather than ask somebody, how can I help you? What do you need? how can I pitch in and be of service? And we need to remember that that's an important question to ask.
And the person you're trying to help needs to trust you enough to tell you what they need. Precisely. What else? I'm not actually looking for solutions. That was a joke. Y'all can just tell me what you think. Who are the most vulnerable? Glenn.
The most vulnerable people, I think, are the people that live in the inner cities, that they can't get out. They're in poverty. There's just no way, But to educate people, that's the main thing. Just start with education, and that's a start, And so that's what I thought of.
Thank you, Glenn. Yep. What else?
Can you say immigrants?
You can say immigrants. Did you want to expand on that? Or that's just your answer? Yep. Yep. Very much so.
That's a very practical thing.
Yeah. So you go ahead and say it again into the mic.
Building partnerships with community organizations like the Toco Hills Food Pantry and others like that is something very concrete and real. And I haven't participated in it yet, but it's not because I don't want to. I haven't been available, but I really admire and I do want to contribute to that in the future. And I think it's very operational. It's very, and helps build relationships. And I'm just so glad that we do that. And I think over time that can grow.
Yep. There are good organizations doing good work. We don't have to start anything from scratch. And if you are passionate about any sort of mobilization, there is a group doing it that can teach you, that can work with you. Did you want to add something?
So there was that movie, remember that film? There was a film that was shown in January, the CBF, there was a CBF film, and there's a CBF ministry that works in the lowest income
Are you talking about the Together for Hope?
Yes.
What is the name? Raising Hope is the name of that documentary. No, that's a TV show. It's in the Mississippi Delta. But go on.
But they also, they're active in all of the lowest income counties across the U.S. And I would love to learn more about them and get involved with them. I thought that showing the movie was a great way to sort of introduce people to their work. And I wanted to know what the follow-up was. I wanted that lady to come back and, create some linkages.
Yeah.
I thought that was
Yeah, so
really
that
cool.
organization works specifically with rural poverty, which is very different from the poverty that we experience or that we see here in Atlanta. Yeah. Okay.
But to see organizations that are doing that kind of research, to target the effort, and then to take practical steps, it just seemed very professional.
Yeah.
I appreciated that.
Yeah, they're a great organization.
Can I quickly add something? There is, he has passed away now, but there was a humorist and essayist named P.J. O'Rourke who wrote, for decades. And one of his essays, he talked about going down to Mexico to cover an election and be an election observer. And long story short, he ended up missing the election because his local guide took him home for lunch with the extended family, and they were eating in this modest home, and someone brought out a guitar and they were playing with the kids. And he said he learned a an awful lot more from that experience than he would have learned, as an election observer. And the last sentence in the essay was, "The world doesn't need more politics, it needs more lunch." And I think that relates to what people have been saying about, about finding out what people need, not telling them what they need, and then taking practical steps to help alleviate their problems,
Yeah.
In partnership.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, we do not have time for our Bible studies, in case you didn't notice. So that is now homework, if you choose to. But I will preach at you for just 1 second, because Nehemiah was going to bring it home a really good point. Something Desmond Tutu said in the video, may he rest in peace, was that when God says that God is going to feed people, God does not send hamburgers down from the sky. Instead, God gifts people with the abilities to help people. And the Nehemiah passages that you are supposed to read tonight were reminding me of working in my chaplaincy internship a few years ago. Something that I came across all of the time when praying with patients was people putting faith in God to heal them above the faith that they put in their doctors, or above the trust that they put in their doctors. And I had this conversation over and over again, that God has entrusted the doctor to have the ability to heal you. God has given this skill and this practice to a person who is coming to heal you. So faith is important, your prayers are important, but God has also put people in your lives who have all of these different abilities to make the world turn round. And what Nehemiah is talking about in rebuilding the wall is that each person has a gift and a skill and a purpose and a place and a task to accomplish. And so when we're talking about poverty, when we're talking about disaster relief, it's our job, our responsibility, our God-given gift to figure out what is ours to do in this scenario, and then to do it. So carry that with you. Read Nehemiah when you get home. And next week we will come back and do this again. Thank you for a really good conversation. It was so good that we didn't have time to read the Bible. So do that on your own time. But thanks, everyone.